Hey everyone, welcome back to the program. Today we are doing another stereo showdown. This is where I compare different pressings of the same album in order to understand which is the better one. And today we are doing Let It Be by the Beatles, and this is in celebration of the brand new mix done by Giles Martin and Sam O'Kell. And I am featuring 5 different pressings, starting with my original 1970 US pressing, then a 1980s-ish UK pressing that came out of my Blue box set. Then we have the 1986 Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab pressing, followed by the 2012 reissue. This is a stereo reissue taken from the 2009 digital remasters. And finally, we have the Giles Martin and Sam O'Kell 2021 remix that was just released. I had thought about including the 2003 Let It Be Naked and the brand new released 1969 Glenn Johns mix, but both of those, they're different running orders, and also I just felt like those mixes are really gonna stand out and sort of take away from the work that Giles Martin and Sam O'Kell did on the 2021 mix, because I really want that to be the showcase in terms of, is it better? Is it worse? Is it about the same? One feedback I got from the last time I did this, I think for Abbey Road, was that a lot of you folks wished that I mixed up the order that I played the samples. And I think there was even a suggestion that I mask what each pressing is. So I've taken both of these suggestions and we're gonna change it up a little bit for this episode. So instead of telling you which pressing it is up front, I will not only be mixing all of these up each time I play the samples, but I will label each sample a designated letter. So A through E corresponds to the 5 different pressings. However, you won't know A through E which is which until the very end when I reveal the letters, the corresponding pressings to each letter. While you're watching, try to keep track of what your favorite letter is, and at the end I will reveal, and then that may or may not be surprising. We'll see, we'll find out. This is kind of exciting. And also keep in mind, this is YouTube and it's also the Beatles, and the two don't really mix when it comes to copyright. So these samples I'm gonna play for you are gonna be short. And one last thing to note, I just wanna touch on my audio chain here. So what I did was I cleaned each of these records using my record doctor. Then I played them on my Fluence RT85 using an Otophone 2M Blue cartridge, running directly into my Fez preamp, which was then recorded onto my Zoom H6 recorder. And then I brought them into Final Cut X, and I created essentially a multi-cam clip so that I am able to quickly change between each of the mixes. And so what you're hearing is all of that, plus whatever processing YouTube does. And also I was listening to all of these samples on headphones. Now, if you're just using computer speakers, the differences may not be as apparent as if you were to then put on headphones. So just keep that in mind. It might sound a little different if you're not wearing headphones or even earbuds. So I might suggest you put those on for this section. All right, with all that said, let's get into it, starting with Two of Us. Check out the intro section here. And now listen for when the vocals come in. You and me Sunday driving, 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 you and me Sunday driving. And lastly, check out the vocal harmony here. Out ahead, out ahead, out ahead, out ahead, out ahead. All right, moving on to Dig a Pony. Check out the intro lick here. Now for this next section, I want you to focus in on John's vocals.
Well, you can celebrate anything you want. 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 Well, you can celebrate anything you want.
Moving on, listen for the cymbal hits here.
Everything has got to be just like you want it. Everything has got to be just like you want it. Everything has got to be just like you want it. Everything has got to be just like you want it. Everything has got to be just like you want it.
Lastly, I really want you to listen for the guitar tone. Up next, we have Across the Universe, and again, I want you to focus in on the guitar tone here. Next, listen for John's vocal treatment.
Across the universe, across the universe, across the universe, across the universe, across the universe.
For this next section, I want you to focus on the balance between the Spector elements, the orchestra choir kind of elements, and John's voice.
Nothing's gonna change my world. 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 Nothing's gonna change my world.
Next, listen for this build-up section here. Up next, we have I, Me, Mine, and I want you to listen for the strain in George's vocals here.
Everyone's weaving it. Everyone's weaving it. Everyone's weaving it. Everyone's weaving it. Everyone's weaving it.
Next, listen for the guitars.
I, me, mine. I, me, mine. I, me, mine. I, me, mine. I, me, mine.
For this next section, I want you to listen for the clarity of the Phil Spector elements.
Blowing more freely than wine. 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 Blowing more freely than wine.
And lastly, I want you to focus in on the balance of this rundown section. All right, for Dig It, I would say just focus in on John's vocals versus the mix of the other instruments.
Like the FBI, like the FBI, like the FBI, like the FBI, like the FBI.
All right, up next we have the title track, and I want you to listen to the surface noise or the quiet section of when the song first starts with Paul's vocals.
When I find myself in times of trouble, 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 when I find myself in times of trouble.
All right, next I want you to listen for the balance of the backup vocals here.
Let it be, 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 let it be.
And then check out when the drums kick in.
Let it be, 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 let it be.
All right, for this next section, I want you to focus in on Billy's piano and the drumming. All right, moving on, we're gonna focus in on George's guitar solo here. And lastly, I want you to focus in on the overall balance of when the Phil Spector moments really, I wouldn't say overpower, but you know, they really come in full force here.
Let it be, 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 let it be.
Moving on to Maggie Mae, let's check out the first section.
They have taken head away, 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 they have taken head away.
And then I want you to focus in on the separation of the vocals here. See how clear these two voices are.
But up in the home of Boundy, 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 but up in the home of Boundy.
Flipping over to side 2, we have I've Got a Feeling. I want you to focus in on the overall mix in the very beginning.
A feeling I can't hide, oh no. 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 A feeling I can't hide, oh no.
And then listen for this guitar run-up section here.
I've got a feeling. I've got a feeling. I've got a feeling. I've got a feeling. I've got a feeling.
And then listen for like what I call the crazy McCartney vocal section. Now I want you to focus in on how John's vocals sound here.
Everybody had a hard year. 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 Everybody had a hard year.
Now during this instrumental section, I want you to focus in on the bass. And finally, listen for the stereo treatment of John and Paul's vocals here.
Everybody had a hard time. 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 Everybody had a hard time.
Moving on to One After 909, I want you to focus in on the vocals.
Move over twice. Come on, baby, don't be gold as ice. Move over twice. Come on, baby, don't be gold as ice. Move over twice. Come on, baby, don't be gold as ice. Move over twice. Come on, baby, don't be gold as ice. Move over twice. Come on, baby, don't be gold as ice.
And now check out the guitar solo. So now we have the long and winding road, and I want you to listen for when the strings and the horns hit. And then we come to this section where the strings do this really interesting lick, and I want to see if you can hear any differences between the different pressings. Like, do you hear more detail or less detail?
Anyway, you'll never know. Anyway, you'll never know. Anyway, you'll never know. Anyway, you'll never know. Anyway, you'll never know.
Finally, for this section, I want you to listen for the overall balance of the Spector elements versus Paul's vocals.
Don't keep me waiting here. Don't keep me waiting here. Don't keep me waiting.
right, up next we have For You Blue, and I want you to listen to the overall mix of George's vocals versus the rhythm section.
I love you more than ever, girl, I do. I love you more than ever, girl, I do. I love you more than ever, girl, I do. I love you more than ever, girl, I do. I love you more than ever, girl, I do.
And now check out the bass in this moment. And then there's this fun guitar section. And lastly, I want you to focus in on the piano in this section. All right, the final track, Get Back. I want to start when the vocals first hit.
Jojo was a man who thought he was a loner. Jojo was a man who thought he was a loner. Jojo was a man who thought he was a loner. Jojo was a man who thought he was a loner. Jojo was a man who thought he was a loner.
And then when the guitar solo first starts, listen for the overall mix. Now, when Billy Preston's piano comes in this section, I really want you to focus in on the clarity of his playing. And lastly, I want you to listen for the final guitar solo. All right, so those are the samples, and now here, as I promised, the key for the letters to the corresponding pressings. What do you think? Was that interesting? Was that different? I know for myself, the worst, in my opinion, is the 2012 stereo pressing. I don't know what it is. I cleaned that record and still it sounded bad. There was surface noise. There was weird, like, scorbly sounding moments. There was a lot of high-end distortion. It just sounded like a bad pressing. It doesn't sound good at all to me. I didn't like, overall, I would say it sounded pretty dead and flat to me. Now, moving on, it's weird to place it here because it is so expensive, but yeah, the Mobile Fidelity pressing, I felt, while some songs it sounded pretty good, overall, the high end was boosted quite a bit, and I think that's just, they do the happy face EQ where they boost the highs and the lows, but honestly, I don't even know if they boosted the lows that much, at least in comparison to the original pressings. And then when they brought up the highs, they also brought up a lot of tape hiss, and it just, it detracts from the overall sound of it. Plus, I feel like some of the cymbal hits and some of the higher end guitar notes just start to distort and they overpower the mix. I think the Mobile Fidelity mastering on some songs sounds okay, but as a whole, and for considering how much that goes for, it's like anywhere from $150 to $250 right now. But I don't think it's worth it. Plus, the cover art isn't very good. I don't know what happened there. It's not just my pressing. The versions I've seen on Discogs all look the same, but it looks like they did a color photocopy of the original cover. And then we have the original pressing plus my UK pressing, which are essentially the same mix. My US pressing, as you probably now know, has a lot more wear and tear over the years. But by and large, they sound very similar, and I think it's a very good mix. I do appreciate it. And then finally, we have the 2021 mix done by Sam O'Kell and Giles Martin. And it is, while I enjoy it, it didn't blow me away, but I think I was expecting to not get blown away. You know what I mean? Like I knew Once I heard that they were honoring the Phil Spector elements, I knew to temper my expectations. And so going into this, I wasn't disappointed by this mix, but it is not that different from the original mix. But the subtle differences they do make, I think, are for the better. Now, on vinyl, I don't think those differences are as apparent because of the nature of vinyl. It's just limiting, right? You can't do as much as you can digitally. So I think on vinyl, I don't know how necessary this version is to own. It may not even be necessary if you have a really clean vinyl copy of that original mix, whether it be an original pressing or a later reissue like my UK pressing. This may not be necessary, but I think where it really shines, I mean, definitely with headphones, but I think where it really shines is giving this album a cohesive whole. And that was their intent moving into this mix, was that essentially what you have is 3 different recording sources. You have the bulk of the album, which was recorded in the basement of Apple headquarters. Then you have 3 songs recorded on the rooftop that were included on this album. And then you have Across the Universe, which was, I forget where that was recorded, but it was done a couple years, well, not a couple years, it was about a year or so prior. So 3 different sources. And so what they were aiming to do was to bring them all together and make them sound like they were all recorded in the same place. Now, granted, some of that is impossible, but I thought they got really, really close. And I think that's where this really excels, is it feels cohesive. And honestly, it gave me a better appreciation of this original mix, this 1970 mix. They really honored it and kind of modernized it here and there with like the drums and the bass and the stereo separation, the overall balance of the Phil Spector mix. I feel like all of those elements are there, but it still sounds like that vintage mix, you know what I mean? I think they struck the right balance between the two, at least again on vinyl. And if you're looking for a new copy, I really recommend picking up this. I think it sounds fantastic. If you can, that box set is awesome. But if you can't afford that, at the very least, pick this version up by itself. That being said, avoid the 2012 stereo reissue. You can tell by that sticker on the side. And also, don't buy the low fidelity version. In fact, I think your money would be better spent picking up an original 1970 box set. Or, depending on what you really like, you might be better off picking up the Let It Be Naked on vinyl, because I don't think they're, well, at least not in the foreseeable future, going to be repressing this. And the price keeps going up on this. I'd say, if you're waiting to pull the trigger, you might as well do it now. Well, that will do it for today. I'm really curious to know what you think. Was anything surprising, or just did it kind of confirm what you already felt about these different mixes? I really want to know. And be sure to let me know what is your preferred version of this album, if you have one or not. And if your opinion differs than mine, do you think the low fidelity version sounds better? I'm curious to know. Maybe I just got a bum copy. Who knows? All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for watching, but I especially want to thank my members over on Patreon. Until then, I'm your Vinyl Geek, and I'll catch you on the flip side.